Would you expect some type of war with Iran to happen sooner rather than later? Some type of conflict or
Yeah.
going back into Gaza? Because of this, it's just like you said, if they're putting on this note of finality, like it's over, once it all just sort of calms down and, the bloodlust goes down, people are just going to be like, what the hell was that, Israel? What the,
Yeah.
like, yeah, how, what, like, isn't there there's got to be something, some type of repercussions for this behavior, right? That was a big no-no. You really went overboard, right? We
Yeah. Well,
watched this
right.
just,
I, well, I would hope so. And, unfortunately, we have a media that is very, very friendly to Israel and, complicit in its crimes, and they'll do what they can to spin it. That's what they're already doing. They're describing this as a great victory for Israel, and that, that they're cheering the return of the hostages. And again, absolutely no interest in the many, many more hostages really on the Palestinian side. And there'll be, as we've seen, just I mean, there's no shame in our mainstream media. They'll do what they can to hide what's happened. But I think you're right. It's like as time goes by, and certainly more people get into Gaza, and a real accounting takes place, and um, the bodies are removed from under the rubble and so on, we'll begin to get a sense of a more accurate sense of the full extent of the horror that took place there. And it again, the mainstream media and Western governments, they'll do what they can to ignore that, but they can't hide it completely, and it will come out and it will create pressure. And I think
and
within Israel, they often, that there is going to be a lot of questioning. Right now, there's this sort of a euphoria there. But when the dust settles, they say, yeah, what was that all about? And they say, yeah, now I go on vacation and I can't go to Europe, because somebody's going to spit on me, or I've got to pretend to be, anybody but an Israeli. There's something, we paid a huge cost for this. And what did we achieve? Again, it's just because I think most people in Israel know, like, this deal that was done could have been easily done a year, if not earlier, even even 18 months earlier. It's just there was no reason for it, for the war to go on as it did. I mean, these plans, they were in the air. These proposals were there, but Netanyahu clearly was not interested in them. He wanted to go ahead with the ethnic cleansing, and of course, there are people who are mad that he has put the ethnic cleansing on hold. That's what's happening in Israel. But we'll see. It's going to, we'll see if the extremists win out here and they get their ethnic cleansing again. I think they will eventually. It's not that the majority is opposed to it. It's just that they're tired of it, and they want to take a rest. But if there's some excuse that can be fabricated somewhere down the road, I think it will start up again.
right. But right, as that pressure builds, as you said, both domestically and internationally, people are just like, well, what was that all about? Yeah, they really, I don't understand how they can expect to ever be treated as a normal country ever again after this. And I think maybe the only thing that they got is to say, well, we'll just go all out war, and then everybody will kind of forget about it. And as long as we come out on top, we get a right history. That might be the mindset. I mean, just think about it.
Yeah.
From now on, whenever Israel does any type of sporting event, any type of international competition, they're going to be booed, and just people are just going to do whatever they can to beat them. It's just like it's going to be like that, I think, forever. I don't understand. They've done irreparable damage to them. They'll be
Yeah.
hated
Well,
forever.
yeah. Maybe the intensity of it will subside gradually over time, but it's gonna be there. I mean, it's a black mark is not going to can't be washed off.
Right. Okay. Something else I was just thinking about. I was just thinking about our leaders, people we'll just take Trump, for example. Do they think he's aware of what people think about him and his choices that he makes when he does these tariffs, or his refusal to release the Epstein files, bombing Iran, clearly doing things that are in the interest of Israel instead of the United States? He has to get that. Or do you think that they have, the people around him that could control him or have his ear have done a good enough job. They basically Truman showed it for him to create this fake reality with them. And in a way, it's easier to control Trump. First of all, because he's very susceptible to flattery as in his narcissism, but he has his own social media platform, Truth Social. So like, okay, if that's where he's getting his news, like where does he get it? He gets it Fox News in his own platform. We fill those two things up with just whatever we want him to hear. A pro-Zionist things that how you're so great and everybody loves Israel, and he actually thinks that. Or do you think he is aware of what people are, or the sentiment that's growing up and just the grassroots here in the United States? People are like, we don't like what you're doing with putting Israel first. Do you think he's really aware of all this?
I think he must be aware of it to a certain extent. I mean, that's one reason he became elected, is that he did have, an appreciation of what common people thought, and that's, much more so than a lot of the other Republican and, Democratic candidates. But now he's president. He is surrounded by these people. And I think, you talk about the bubble that he's in, but I think it's true to a great extent of the entire, ruling class, the political class and throughout the West. They live within their bubble. And that's why we often see this real disconnect. They're doing these things that are quite unpopular. And, again, in these Western European leaders, the main ones are well below 20%. Trump's actually doing better than they are, rather. But his approval ratings are actually very low too, by historical standards. But I think it's all a reflection of this, let's say, this growing gap between the political class and average people. They just don't really have any sense of their concerns. They don't have connections with these people anymore. And they are always reassuring themselves, so this is what you got to do. This is the right thing, and, within the people that they talk to every day, it just seems obvious that what Keir Starmer, or what Chancellor Merz, what we're doing is correct, because everybody around me is telling me that it's correct. And they do hear about these opinion polls and say, well, these are obviously ignorant masses and we need to educate them, and in time they'll get it. I think there's some of that all around. But he must be to some extent, Trump, he must be to some extent aware of it. But there are these countervailing forces. There's a lot of money, behind, and maybe blackmail. I think that's certainly a possibility. And he just decides that the money and the blackmail are more important. By the way, that just reminds me of what happened when he gave that speech to the Knesset in Israel. He pointed out Miriam Adelson, his number one donor, the widow of Sheldon Adelson. And it was just like, I think a lot of people were saying, shut up, you're not supposed to say these things out loud. But he was saying that she and her late husband were the most frequent visitors to the White House. And it was like from them that he learned about the Golan Heights and the importance of that. The U.S. went ahead and recognized the Golan Heights. So, you're just telling us, that it was this one. And he also just talked about the sense of entitlement that Sheldon Adelson has. Like, it's just, you would even talk down to the president or just insist on showing up even when it wasn't convenient for President Trump. He say, but hey, Sheldon, I'm the president. He thought it was all very funny, and he was talking about it. Then at the end, he kept on pointing to Miriam Adelson there in the audience, and then he said, once I asked her, like, who are you more devoted to, the U.S. or Israel? And she didn't give an answer, but I think we know. And clearly he was implying it was Israel. Yeah. And it was all these things that, so-called, anti-Semites, come up with. But there it was just, being broadcast spoken out loud. I think a lot of people, were probably really, made very, very nervous by these contents. You're not supposed to be that open about it, but he was. That's the one, I think maybe if you want to say that talk about the real achievements of the Trump administration, it is actually bringing these things to light.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like really the root of all this problem is the fiat money system. Like, I don't feel like any of this stuff, a $1 trillion budget for the military industrial complex and just this rampant corruption everywhere, starting all these wars. It's all because of the fiat money system, right? It's when we completely got off the gold standard. It allowed us to do this, and then now it's just like we just have a printing press and we just buy up everybody, and it's just all debt. Like, I saw somewhere that said that like the world has a total of $337 trillion of debt. And I was like, who do we owe that money to? Who owes what? Like, how does that even work? It's just like just an imaginary system. And we just, us everyday people just suffer through inflation through it is all it is. It's just these people can just buy off whoever they want. It's this ruling class because we have this printing press and we just, try to maintain control over it with our, through our military or just these really corrupt deals that we have with people. But it can't last that much longer, right? I mean, how does this work?
Well, I think, that's probably like the whole question of the fiat money system is probably beyond the scope of this podcast. I mean, I think that would deserve many, many episodes to discuss it in depth. But I would say just in general that, it does make possible these huge debts and these, the bloated Pentagon budget. I think there's no question about that. If there was, let's say, if our money was real and that, that if every penny of it had to be accounted for, then it would be very hard to justify, these huge ticket items. I think there's no question about it because you would have to go to the voters and say, oh, we want to produce so many more weapons and start so many more wars. It's going to cost you about an extra $10,000 a year per family. Is that okay? And the answer obviously is going to be no. But with the current system, you can just do it, and then you indirectly tax those people through inflation, right? And that's what we have happening. But I would say that I think the mega donor problem is not so much linked to that. Maybe you can make an argument that it was, but there can be very wealthy people in a different system. Let's say if the dollar was still had the gold standard, you're going to have phenomenally wealthy people for one reason or another who can influence government.
Yeah, but I think those phenomenally wealthy people can get even more phenomenally wealthy because of how they're able to lobby the government, get their special carve-outs and bills or whatever it is, have, foreknowledge of events to make tons of money on the stock market. It's clearly I think if that is a big part of the problem, and the fiat money system is it's an anomaly. That's what we're living through right now. So we like to think, because I grew up the whole time in a fiat system and the dollar was backed by the faith of the U.S. government, but really that's not how it's traditionally ever been. I mean, we got off completely in 1971. It's only been like 54 years, and it's already shown how horrible it's been. You just see how the value of the dollar has crashed by like 98%, since it's done. It's like, okay, well, how long before the whole thing just implodes? And I think that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at a lot of different things happening, but the whole engine of the U.S. empire is based on this dollar system. And as that starts to give away, that's kind of what I think we need to hope for to end this empire and go back to, a more fiscally responsible system, which would be a gold standard or something like that, some commodity standard. But yeah, let's don't get into it because that'll be for a different podcast maybe. Maybe we haven't talked about Russia in a while. Can you maybe update me what's going on there? What's the big news? I mean, the Tomahawks or whatever. But
well, we'll start with the Tomahawks. I find it very interesting. Again, we've mentioned the technical difficulties involved, and it's not clear that there are any way to launch those Tomahawks from Ukraine. There is a possibility. Again, it's not. I've heard conflicting reports. There was some sort of program that the U.S. military started a couple of years ago to develop simpler launchers for the Tomahawks. And then either that is maybe succeeding or is about to bear fruit or it was called off. I've heard conflicting reports on that. So there may be something that is available soon. There may be a way actually to launch Tomahawks, from Ukraine. I think that's the first thing that we should, be aware of. Now, it has caused Putin's treatment of this question has sparked a huge controversy and actually a lot of grumbling and even real anger, both within Russia, within the Russian media, and apparently, I think, within the Russian leadership and the Russian population, but also within the larger dissident community. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was listening to the Duran,
and I listened to it too.
Yeah, Alex Cristoforo was, as he usually does, interviewing Alex Makuras, but he spoke a lot more than he usually does because he was really worked up about it. He was angry in a way that I haven't seen. He
sounded like me with you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So he was going on and on. It's like, why is Putin, what does he think he's doing? Why doesn't he just speak the truth, et cetera, et cetera. What does he think he's there's obviously no point in trying to appease Trump and these people, and you're also, by his failure by his because of his very soft response to this, he is inviting the crossing of red lines. He's inviting, further attacks on Russia. That's what Alex Cristoforo was saying, and what a lot of people apparently within Russia are saying too. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess what I would say is I understand the anger, and I guess I feel some of it too. So I'm not saying that he was wrong. He might very well be right, but I think that we should stop and think about Putin's own position and maybe the intelligence that he has. It's not clear if the Ukrainians actually can launch these. And, maybe they just, I'm sure the Russians really know one way or the other. And maybe the intelligence is that they can't do it. It's not going to happen for at least a year, maybe even longer than that. And Putin knows that. And then Putin also, I think, understands Trump's psychology. And so what we're saying is okay, let's just speak the truth. Just throw down the gauntlet. Let's just tell Trump, okay, if you do this, we're going to strike a base in Romania or maybe even Germany or something with an Oreshnik. Don't do it, man. It's that I think that might work with a lot of leaders, but in the case of Trump, that's the sort of thing that just might set him off. And you remember what happened, with when the Chinese imposed the restrictions on the rare earths. Trump was infuriated and then he's declared that he's going to slap these 100% tariffs. And to my knowledge, he still hasn't taken that back, though, he may very well. It's just that you don't want to infuriate him when we're talking about not tariffs, but we're talking about missiles flying across the border and a potential for a World War III. And you don't want to provoke him. I mean, Trump, I think his basic instincts, he doesn't like this war, but he's also shown himself to be very reckless in ways. And, you maybe have this general, preference for a diplomatic solution, but we also see that he can actually, go places that, even the Biden administration wouldn't go. Again, we had the attack on Iran. And I think the Russians are aware of that. Putin's very much aware of that. And he's just thinking, look, I don't think this is ever even going to happen. Why ignite this fire right now? Let's just try to make it go away and let's not talk about it because it won't happen. Maybe that's the way Putin is looking at it. And I can understand it. Again, it's just we have to differentiate between, us, we don't actually bear any responsibility. We don't have a whole country on our shoulders, or our comments aren't going to spark World War III or anything. But but Putin's comments might. He does have to look at these things. He does have to consider all these possibilities. He can't speak freely. He speaks as the president of Russia, and he must be more cautious. Again, maybe he's making a mistake, and he is inviting further attacks. I understand those arguments, and they may be true, but I think we have to at least allow for the possibility that he actually is pursuing the correct course of action and avoiding an unnecessary escalation.